She was bruised, shivering, and barely conscious. A billionaire no one recognized, until a single dad heard her whisper, "Let me take you back to that night, before If You Believe Second Chance. Redemptions, so please subscribe, because this story is full of surprises, and joy led back on the story, the one that changed everything. It wasn't just cold. It was cruel. The kind of cold that snuck beneath your skin and made even memories shiver. The snow had begun at dusk and hadn't stopped since. It fell thick and soundless over the small town in Wyoming like a shroud, hiding what needed hiding, softening what was already broken. Most homes had long since tucked themselves in, windows dimmed, fireplaces aglow, dinner dishes drying in the sink. But not everyone was safe inside. One man still walked, boots cracking through the crust of fresh snow, shoulders hunched against the wind that bit like regret. Colt Merrick, 39, builder by trade, father by grace, a quiet man with quieter griefs. He wasn't out on a nighttime stroll for his health. He was searching. For his dog, for the last thread of peace before the storm inside him overtook the one outside. "Junie's gonna worry if I don't find him," he muttered, barely louder than the wind. "Peanut, come on, boy." His flashlight swept over battered fences, over stuffed trash bins, and snow-laden mailboxes. Peanut had slipped out after dinner, nothing new. But the way the temperature had dropped, every second began to feel heavier than the last. He'd seen what winter could steal when no one was looking. He ducked into an alley, squeezed between two long-forgotten storefronts. The snow there was untouched, deep, and ghostly quiet, until he heard it. Not a bark, not a cry, just a faint sound, softer than the wind. A whisper maybe, a breath. Colt froze. His flashlight moved in slow, deliberate arcs until it landed on what he first thought was a discarded pile of cloth against the brick. But it was shaped wrong. It was a woman, slumped sideways in the snow, her coat torn open at the seams, hair tangled and glazed with frost. Her face, delicate, bruised, dirt-streaked, was pale in a way that made something inside him recoil. Her lips parted, as if she'd been trying to say something to no one. He dropped to his knees. "Ma'am." His voice was soft, cautious, as though afraid even his breath might shatter her. No response. She was breathing, but only just. Her hands were curled in tight fists, like she'd been clinging to herself, one clutching the frayed collar of her coat, as if it were the last thing she owned in this world. Colt's throat tightened. Jesus. He yanked off his own coat, wrapping it around her trembling frame. She didn't react. Her skin was ice. No purse. No phone. No footprints in or out but his own. He checked his phone. No signal. The truck was blocks away, and the nearest hospital a mile out. She wouldn't last if he waited. He gritted his teeth, slid one arm beneath her knees, the other under her back. She was heartbreakingly light. As he lifted her, her lips moved. "Don't let them." Her voice was a ghost. "Don't let them find me." Colt's pulse stopped. "I won't," he whispered back, not even knowing what it meant but meaning it. And then he ran. The snow clawed at his legs. The wind slapped his face, dragged at every step. Twice he nearly fell, but he held her close, closer than he'd held anyone in years. Once, just once, her eyes fluttered open and met his, and then closed again. By the time the hospital doors slid open with their quiet hum, Colt was shaking, soaked, breathless. A nurse saw him and gasped. "Help! Please, she's freezing!" he shouted, laying her down as gently as if she might break apart. Maybe she already had. "Do you know her name?" the nurse asked, tugging at his arm as others swarmed around them. He looked down at her bruised, ethereal face. She said, "Serafina. That's all." Then she was gone, pulled into the fluorescent whirlwind of emergency medicine. Colt stood still, snow melting in his hair, red dripping from his knuckles, where the cold had split the skin. He hadn't even noticed. He hadn't even cared. Back home, his cabin stood at the edge of town, like a memory too stubborn to leave. Junie, 8 years old and brave in ways her father couldn't name, waited on the couch, wrapped in a blanket like a soldier in hiding. Peanut had returned on his own, curled at her feet like nothing had happened. "Daddy!" She blinked up at him, worry like a shadow in her eyes. I found someone, Colt murmured, sinking beside her. Not Peanut. A woman. In the snow. I think we saved her. Junie's voice was a whisper. Is she gonna be okay? I don't know, he said. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had to pretend to be strong. She reached out, small fingers curling into his. And just like that, something inside Colt uncoiled. Not fully, but enough to let the firelight touch a part of him he thought had gone numb. Morning came slow and golden, casting long shadows across the cabin's wooden floor. The world was hushed, as if even the sky was holding its breath. Colt stood in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal he wasn't hungry for. Junie sat at the table, crayons and newspaper her battlefield, drawing dinosaurs with careful concentration. "Dad," she asked softly, eyes flicking up, "what happened to the lady?" "She made it through the night," he said. "They've got her stable, but she still doesn't remember much." "She looks sad," Junie said, coloring in a triceratops. "Yeah," Colt replied. "She did." He hadn't slept. Couldn't. He'd replayed her words over and over. Don't let them find me. Who was she running from? And why did it feel like her story was going to tangle into his, whether he wanted it to or not? The call came around noon. "Mr. Merrick? This is Dr. Carver from Memorial. Seraphina's awake. She's asking for you." He didn't even hesitate. Junie was already bundling up. At the hospital, room 214 was quiet when they entered. Seraphina sat propped against the pillows, her bruises faded but still there. Her hair brushed her shoulders in tangled waves. Her pale green eyes flicked toward Colt, then softened when they landed on Junie. "You came back," she whispered. "Of course," Colt said, stepping inside. "I couldn't just leave you out there." Junie gave a shy wave. "Hi." Seraphina smiled, fragile, tentative, real. "Hi, sweetheart. Do you remember anything?" Colt asked. She shook her head. "Just pieces. My name. That's all. The rest. It's like trying to remember a dream after waking up." "Would you like us to call someone?" "Family," he asked. Her gaze turned away. "No. Please, not yet." That same flicker in her eyes, fear in a cage. Controlled. Familiar. Colt had seen it in the mirror after his wife passed. When people asked if he was okay, Andy lied with a nod. "I don't feel safe going back," Seraphina whispered. "Not until I remember what I'd be going back to." "You're not ready," Colt said gently. "No," she replied. Dr. Carver entered, kind and crisp. "Miss Vale is stable. With your consent, Mr. Merrick, and given the storm, we'd like to release her into your care. Temporarily." Colt blinked. "You want her to come home with me?" Seraphina lowered her eyes. "I know how strange it sounds, but I won't be a burden. I just need a few days." Junie looked up from her coloring, hummed a little tune, and something in that tiny sound sealed Colt's answer. "Okay," he said. "We'll figure it out." The drive back was quiet. Seraphina stared out at the trees, the borrowed coat too big on her small frame. Junie's mittens swallowed her hands. "Why'd you say yes?" she asked, almost to herself. Colt gripped the wheel tighter. "Because I've been alone, and I know what it's like when the quiet gets too loud." She said nothing, but her eyes shimmered. That night, Seraphina stood by the living room window as moonlight spilled across the snowy ground. "I owe you more than I can say," she whispered. Colt shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I was in that alley for a reason," she said. "I think I was running. Maybe from someone. Maybe from myself. I'm scared of what I'll remember." "You don't have to explain," he said softly. "Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Just rest." She turned to him, eyes gleaming. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He paused. "Because once, when I didn't deserve it, someone was kind to me." A long breath passed between them. Then, softer than falling snow. "Colt, that night, when you carried me, I wasn't sure I wanted to live, but something about the way you held me made me want to keep breathing." He didn't speak, but something inside him cracked, not from hurt, from hope, because sometimes being saved isn't what changes your life. It's remembering you were worth saving at all. And in that quiet cabin, where grief once lived and snow once whispered death, something else began. A second chance. A healing. A quiet miracle. And it was only the beginning. She pointed toward the small bundle on the table and said, I wasn't sure if you had a dog, so I gave you Peanut too. A gentle smile played on Serafina's lips, soft and unsure. I don't know if I have a dog, she murmured, but I think I'd like Peanut. You can share him with me. From his quiet post in the kitchen, Colt watched the scene unfold, and for a moment, something in his chest loosened, something long clenched by years of silence and survival. There was no grand, thunderous revelation in that exchange, no cinematic crescendo, just a quiet, unspoken kind of magic, the kind born when kindness was returned without prompting, without expectation. Later that morning, as Junie busied herself outside with snow forts and dragon lairs sculpted from white powder, Serafina stood at the frosted window, her eyes following the little girl with quiet reverence. She's remarkable, she said softly, almost to herself. Colt, standing at the sink with suds clinging to his fingers, didn't look up. She gets that from her mom. Serafina glanced sideways. You don't talk about her. There's not much I can say that doesn't hurt, Colt replied plainly. Anna was sunlight, bright, effortless. A pause. She passed when Junie was 5. Cancer came fast. I'm so sorry, Serafina whispered, sorrow threading her voice. She hesitated, then added, You've raised a good kid. Colt dried his hands with slow precision. I've tried. Some days it feels like I'm patching a roof with a fishing net, but we managed to stay dry enough. She smiled faintly at the imagery, then noticed the sketchbook on the side table. That's her therapy, isn't it? Colt nodded. She doesn't talk about missing Anna, not directly. But if you look close at her drawings, Anna shows up sometimes. In the corner, hair like fire, playing piano. Surprise lit Serafina's eyes. Anna played. Professionally. Before Junie was born, music was the first thing I ever saw that could quiet a whole room. A stillness lingered between them. Then Serafina spoke, hesitant and searching. I played too. I think. I remember the keys, not the faces around them, not the rooms, but the feel of them, the sound of ivory beneath my hands, that I remember. Colt turned fully toward her, his gaze steady. Maybe that's a start. She gave the smallest nod. Maybe. That afternoon, Junie swept Serafina into her world, a world only children could construct with unspoken rules and boundless imagination. There were snow angels with lopsided wings, steaming cocoa overloaded with marshmallows, and a wild game where the floor turned into broccoli lava. Colt watched from the porch, coffee in hand, boots propped on the railing, a quiet curiosity blooming within him. How does a woman like her, elegant, bright, almost celestial, end up terrified and half-frozen in a dark alley? When Junie had finally fallen into a nap, cocooned beneath her quilt, Serafina joined Colt in the living room, cradling the sketchbook in her hands. She made me a new page, she said, offering it to him. The drawing was childlike, whimsical. The figures were labeled Junie, Dad, Sarah, Peanut, and in the sky above, written in waxy crayon, a single glowing word, stars. And beside it, safe. She's starting to trust you, Colt said gently. She shouldn't, Serafina whispered, more to herself than to him. Why not? She stared into the flames. Because I don't know what I've done, or who I was running from. And part of me is scared that when I remember, I won't like the woman I used to be. Colt leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low and grounding. Do you think she's gone? That version of you? A long silence passed. I think I left her behind in that alley. Then maybe, he said softly, that's not the worst thing. Her eyes turned to him, rimmed with unshed tears. Colt, what if I was cruel? Or selfish? What if I had power and wasted it? Then maybe, he said, not blinking. This is your second chance. And maybe the only person who gets to decide who you are now is you. She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, tentatively, as if testing the permission to feel again, Serafina reached out and laid her hand over his. It was such a small gesture, fingers resting on skin, but to Colt, it felt like the sound of something long sealed cracking open, like a cabin window stuck all winter, finally surrendering to the breath of spring. That night, as the wind howled beyond the cabin and the dark woods whispered secrets only they remembered, Junie slept with her sketchbook tucked beneath her pillow. Serafina stood beside her for a while, watching the rhythm of her breath, then padded softly back to the living room where Colt sat by the fire, a book open but unread in his lap. She paused in the doorway. "I'd like to try playing again." "Anna's piano's in the shed," Colt said, his voice barely above the fire's crackle. "I haven't touched it since she passed." "Would you bring it in when you're ready?" He nodded. "I think," Serafina said quietly, "I need to hear what I still remember." The piano arrived that Saturday. Colt wheeled it in on a dolly, whose wheels squeaked like memory dragging its heels. The instrument had been buried under 2 tarps and years of dust. Grief settled over it like snowfall. It had belonged to Anna, and Colt hadn't dared lift the cover since the day they laid her to rest. Now, as the upright rolled into the heart of the cabin, the air seemed to bend reverent. Even Junie, who normally met all change with fireworks and questions, stood still, crayon frozen midair. "Can I clean it?" she asked quietly. Colt nodded. With quiet purpose, Junie wiped the keys while Serafina hovered nearby, her presence delicate, as if standing too close might fracture something sacred. She hadn't asked for much since arriving, but this mattered. When Junie stepped back, Serafina sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, uncertain. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then middle C. A breath. Another note. 2 more. Her hands moved like they were searching for a language half forgotten, buried beneath ice and time. And then, out of that fragile memory, came melody. Tentative, unsteady, but real. Colt stood in the kitchen, dish towel forgotten in his hands. The music didn't belong to Anna. Not exactly. It belonged to Serafina. It belonged to now. Even Peanut lifted his head from the rug. "What song is that?" Junie whispered. "I don't know," Serafina said, a tremor in her voice. "But my hands do." Over the next few days, the snow melted slowly. Roads began to clear. The world beyond the cabin stirred back to life. Colt returned to small construction jobs. Serafina stayed with Junie, homeschooling and practicing piano in the golden afternoons. It felt like a rhythm forming, fragile, beautiful. Until Thursday. Colt had just set a new window frame when his phone buzzed. A message from Kyle Rivers, an old friend now working security for a state senator. "Dude, is this the woman staying with you? Check the news, Vail Foundation front page." Colt opened the link, and there she was, Serafina Vail. The photo was polished corporate, hair slicked back, jaw sharp, expression unreadable. The headline read, "Missing Vail heiress, presumed dead, $1 billion legacy in limbo." The article explained it all. She'd vanished from a gala in Jackson Hole 2 weeks prior. Rumors swirled. A media frenzy. Foul play. Corporate power struggles. Colt's world tilted. When he returned home, Junie was sprawled on the floor building the Lego castle. Serafina stood in the kitchen drying dishes. But when she turned and met Colt's eyes, she knew. "I saw it," he said. "I figured you would," she replied. "You lied to me." "I never lied," she said gently. "I just didn't tell." "You're Serafina Vail, the billionaire." She flinched at the word. "You disappeared. People think you're dead. The police are looking. Why here? Why my home?" She lowered her gaze to her trembling hands. "Because the truth wasn't safe." Colt said nothing. She continued, voice raw. "I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't chased. I walked into that alley because I didn't want to be found. My life was performance. A family name. A legacy built on image, not integrity. A man I was supposed to marry, not out of love, but out of strategy." Her voice broke. I changed in a hotel bathroom, put on jeans, walked until my feet blistered, bought a coat from a thrift bin. I wanted to disappear, but someone recognized me. A man. He took my bag. I think he wanted to hurt me. I ran, slipped in snow. It swallowed me. And then you. Colt's jaw unclenched, his eyes softening. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know who I was anymore. Not until this cabin. Your daughter. That piano. He stepped forward. That's not something you can just decide, Serafina. People are looking for you. I'll leave tomorrow. That's not what I meant. She looked up, startled. I meant you get to decide who you're going to be now, not just who you were. From the hallway, Junie's voice broke the silence. Daddy, is Sarah in trouble? Colt turned. No, sweetheart. She just remembered something important. That night, Serafina returned to the piano. Her fingers moved differently, not afraid, but thoughtful. The melody she played wasn't familiar. It was hers. New, unwritten, born of pain and healing. Colt sat beside her. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, she said. Neither do I. But I know this. If you hadn't found me, I wouldn't just be lost. I wouldn't be here. He reached out and laid his hand over hers, gently pressing the keys. You were never lost, Serafina. You were just waiting to be heard. And outside, the wind swept through the pines. But inside the cabin, the fire hummed low, a heartbeat, steady and alive. The box beneath the pine. What if I don't deserve to heal? Her voice was barely a breath in the quiet room. What if I hurt people I don't even remember? Cole didn't flinch at her question. Instead, he took both her trembling hands into his, warm and steady. Then you ask for forgiveness, he said softly, the firelight dancing in his eyes. And you do better. That's all any of us get. Serafina looked at him, her eyes wide with something raw and searching. Around them, the room was wrapped in flickering shadows and the soft hush of the wind pressing against the walls, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And in that moment, something silent and sacred passed between them. Would you stay with me? She asked, her voice fragile, like something newly born. He didn't answer with words. He simply settled beside her, lifted the quilt to cover them both, and let the silence speak in ways language never could. An hour later, with her head resting against his shoulder and her breathing deep and even, Cole gently tucked the quilt tighter around her sleeping frame. Then, careful not to wake her, he rose and stepped outside. The night met him like an old companion, cold, sharp, grounding. He welcomed it. Pulling his phone from his coat pocket, he saw another message from Kyle Rivers. Still no press release, but some board members think she's alive. There's talk of hiring private security. Digging deeper. Colt stared at the words, the glow of the screen throwing light across his weathered features. He typed back, she's safe for now. That's all I can say. A beat passed. You sure she wants to stay hidden? He hesitated, thumb hovering. She doesn't know yet what she wants, but she's starting to remember why she wants it. He slid the phone away, lifted his eyes to where the stars peeked through cracks in the clouds. And then he whispered, not to the night, but to the woman asleep on his couch. You don't have to run anymore. You're not alone. The next morning, long before the sun pushed its way over the mountain ridge, Colt was already up. The quiet just before dawn was where he found his bearings, when the world was still hazy and the memories hadn't sharpened into weapons yet. He moved through the cabin quietly, the floor creaking beneath his boots as he boiled water for coffee. Outside, the snow had hardened overnight, a thin crust shimmering over the earth like glass. The pines stood solemn and unmoving, guardians of the stillness. It was the kind of morning where winter felt less like punishment and more like pause. He heard her behind him before she spoke. Soft steps, the rustle of flannel. Did I sleep here all night? Serafina's voice was scratchy with sleep, her eyes still fogged. You did, Colt said, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Your neck's probably gonna hate you. She chuckled, rubbing at it. Not as bad as I expected. He handed her a mug. Not fancy, but it's hot. She took a sip and exhaled, eyes closing. I forgot how good a real morning can feel. They stood in silence then, the comfortable kind that doesn't need filling. Outside, the world was quiet. Inside, something delicate was beginning to mend. You said something last night, she said after a moment, about Junie saving you. Colt leaned against the counter, the memory already pressing against the edges of his chest. Yeah, she hesitated. Can I ask what happened to her mom? He didn't speak right away. His eyes moved to the window, where Junie's tiny snowman leaned at a crooked angle. Anna and I met in college, he said finally. She was a music major. I was all construction science, calluses and flannel, even back then. Serafina smiled faintly. She used to say I walked like a man twice my age. Like the world owed me something, he said with a small laugh. She was sunshine in a thunderstorm. Laughed too loud, cried at everything, played piano like it had a soul. He swallowed. We married young, bought this cabin with everything we had. It was falling apart back then, but we fixed it. Together. Serafina waited, the quiet stretching gently. She got sick just after Junie turned 5. Pancreatic. Fast. Unforgiving. For months later, she was gone. Serafina's grip tightened around her mug. I held it together for Junie. Cole continued. Made breakfast, brushed her hair, read stories. But inside, I was drywall. Cracked. Waiting to crumble. He paused, his eyes darker now. Not broken, but remembering. One night, I forgot to pick Junie up from her friend's house. Just forgot. It was snowing. She walked home. 2 miles. In boots that didn't fit. He looked away. She came through that door with tears frozen on her cheeks. And instead of yelling, she said, Daddy, if you're too sad to remember me, I'll remember us for both of us. Serafina covered her mouth, her heart shattering. She was 5, he whispered. They stood together in the quiet, the weight of grief making space for something else. Serafina stepped forward, placed her hand over his where it rested on the counter. You did more than survive, she said softly. You built a home. I built a bunker, he replied gently, a place no one could get in, until a woman with frostbite and no memory came crashing through the door. She smiled, eyes glassy. Sorry about that. I'm not. Later that day, Serafina sat with Junie at the kitchen table, painting wooden ornaments. It's Christmas in March, Junie declared, holding up a glitter-covered reindeer. Since you missed it. Serafina grinned. Then it's the best kind of Christmas. Junie dipped her brush in blue. Does Dad always drink that much coffee? Serafina laughed. I think it's how he survives being quiet without exploding. Junie leaned in. He used to talk more. Before Mama went away, Serafina's heart tugged. I'm glad he talks to me, Junie said, then added, I think he likes you, but he gets scared when he likes people. He told you that? Nope, but he had the same scared face when Peanut ran into the road. Too wise, too observant for her age. Can I tell you a secret? Serafina asked. Junie nodded. I'm scared too. Not of him, of remembering something. That makes me leave. Junie thought for a moment, then picked up a tiny ornament shaped like a star and placed it in Serafina's hand. Then take this one, so you don't forget. You don't have to go back. Serafina stared at the little wooden star. That might be the bravest thing anyone's ever said to me. That evening, Colt found her on the porch, the wooden star now dangling from the railing, catching the light of the setting sun. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just breathing. Remember anything? No, but I remember why I want to. He stood beside her. Why's that? Because I want to choose what comes next, she whispered, not run from what came before. He looked at her then, really looked. You know, he said, for someone who started off lost, you're getting good at finding your way. She turned to him, eyes soft. I've had good company. And for once, their silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like the beginning. The snow began to melt, not with grandeur, but in gentle hints. Gravel peeked through the drive. Water dripped from the eaves. Junie no longer zipped her coat to her chin. Inside, Serafina moved differently now. She made coffee, swept the porch, fed Peanut, played the piano, not to remember, but to hope. Then one morning, she asked for something. A box, she said. Cole looked up mid-toast. A box. Wooden. Small. Just enough to hold a few things. He raised an eyebrow. You burying secrets? She smiled. Sort of. By afternoon, she'd gathered a hospital bracelet, her thrift store scarf, and Junie's note. You're safe here in pink marker. She stepped into the softening yard, Junie trailing behind. Near the pine at the fence, Serafina dug with her hands, gentle, slow. When the hole was ready, she placed the box inside, then unclasped the silver pendant from around her neck, a charm shaped like a key, and let it fall in. No words, just breath and peace. That night, they sat by the fire. Cole handed her tea. I didn't ask, he said, about the box. I needed to let go of something, even if I didn't know exactly what it was. You remembered? Just fragments. A man yelling, a flash of champagne, applause that didn't feel like praise, a piano I didn't want to play. Colt nodded, listening. Do you think people can change, even if they forget who they were? She asked. Yes, he said. Why? Because I remember everything, and I'm still not who I was 5 years ago. She stared into her cup. That box wasn't just about what I buried, she said. It was about what I want to carry forward. What's that? This, she whispered. This life. You, Junie. Music. Breathing without performing. You're not performing, he said. Not here. The next day, Cole came home to the scent of cinnamon and the sight of flour on Serafina's nose. She made pie, Junie declared proudly. Serafina looked sheepish. It's structurally unsound. Cole grinned. Then it's perfect. And maybe it was. Because healing doesn't arrive in grand finales. It comes in mismatched mugs, crooked crusts, and the sound of laughter in a place that once only echoed with loss. They were building something here, not a bunker this time. A home. The road to the Merrick cabin had begun to surrender to spring. Mud returned like a memory to the gravel path, slow and honest, as if the earth itself was waking from a long, frozen sleep. It wasn't a sudden change, just a gentle unfolding. Inside the cabin, life had settled into a rhythm, the kind you don't recognize as a miracle until you've lived long enough without one. Colt Merrick, scarred but steady, had gone back to working part-time with a local builder, someone who didn't pry into your past or ask the kind of questions that bruised. He left early each morning, just as the sky paled with dawn, and came home in time for supper. Each day he was greeted at the door by Peanut's bark, sharp and loyal, and Junie's sprite, meandering tales about books she was reading or creatures she had dreamed up in colored pencil. And Serafina. Serafina stayed. She didn't stay out of fear anymore, or confusion, or obligation. She stayed because something in her soul, long fractured and adrift, had finally found ground solid enough to stand on. In the mornings, she played the piano. Not always full songs, sometimes just wandering scales, as if testing the keys for truth. Melodies would surface, shimmering like water before vanishing again. Junie often curled beside her with a sketch pad, drawing what the music felt like, not what it looked like. Sometimes Colt would pause just outside the door when he came home, eyes closed, listening to that music, believing, against all odds, that people really could come back from the edge. One evening, after dinner, the three of them sat together on the porch. Junie was brushing Peanut's fur with a faded pink brush, speaking softly to him as if he were royalty. The sky above had turned into a watercolor, lavender clouds drifting through amber light. A breeze wandered through the trees, carrying pine and the last hints of melting snow. I wrote a letter, Serafina said suddenly, breaking the quiet without disturbing it. Colt turned his head to look at her. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a worn piece of paper, its corners softened with time. Actually, I've written several, she admitted. To who? He asked gently. To myself, she answered. To the woman I used to be. She unfolded the page, then hesitated. Can I read it to you? Colt nodded, quiet. Serafina's voice, when it came, was low but steady, like something once fragile that had found its own strength. Dear Serafina Vale, you did your best with what you had, but somewhere along the way, you stopped asking what you needed. You let the noise define your worth, the cameras define your smile, and the people who wanted pieces of you define your path. But I know now you weren't weak. You were tired. You weren't selfish. You were scared. I forgive you, and I hope wherever you are now, in memory or in shadow, you know that I found something real. A little cabin in Wyoming. A girl who makes stars out of crayons. A man who taught me that kindness doesn't ask for your history. It offers you a future. I'm not you anymore, and that's okay. With compassion. Serafina. Silence stretched after she finished. Not empty but full, thick with something unspoken and sacred. That's beautiful, Colt finally said. I think I needed to say it out loud, she replied, folding the letter with care. Are you going to keep it? She shook her head softly. I think I'll let it go. She rose from the steps and moved to the edge of the porch. Then, with a breath, she released the letter into the breeze. It lifted from her hand like a bird taking flight, dancing upward and away, over the trees, out of sight. That part of me can rest now, she said. Colt watched her, not just with admiration, but with a quiet awe, for her grace, yes, but more than that, for the strength she no longer needed to hide. A few days later, a letter arrived that Serafina hadn't written. No return address. Postmarked from Jackson Hole. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting inside was neat and deliberate. Ms. Vale, if you're reading this, I hope you're safe. There's been no official press release about your disappearance. The foundation board is stalled. The vultures are circling. I've said nothing, and I will continue to say nothing. But if you ever wish to return and reclaim what was yours, I'll be waiting. K.R. Serafina read the initials twice. Kyle Rivers, her former chief of staff. Loyal, quiet, trustworthy. She showed the letter to Colt that night. What does it mean? He asked. It means they haven't found me, and Kyle's protecting me. Silently. Does it make you want to go back? Serafina glanced at the fire flickering low on the hearth, then at Colt. No, not yet. Maybe not ever. He nodded. That's okay. He didn't press, didn't analyze, didn't measure her answer against expectations. He simply held space for her, like he always did. Spring unfolded around them. Wildflowers pierced through thawed earth. The sun lingered longer in the sky. Serafina began to write again. Not letters, but music. Bits and pieces of melody stitched from memory and reinvention. She had no formal manuscript, just a lined journal, a sharpened pencil, and the growing belief that what she was creating mattered, even if no one else ever heard it. One afternoon, Junie peered over her shoulder. What's that one called? She asked. Serafina smiled. The House That Remembered Me. Junie tilted her head. I thought you forgot who you were. I did, Serafina replied, but this house reminded me. Junie nodded in that solemn, childlike way that makes everything feel eternal, and ran off to draw. Later, Serafina would find the picture. A stick-figure family in front of the cabin, standing beneath a banner that read, We're not lost anymore. It was the kind of afternoon that already felt like a memory. The pines swayed gently. The light softened. A bird, somewhere in the woods, sang the same hopeful note over and over again. Colt had just finished mending the back fence when he heard the crunch of gravel, different this time. He squinted toward the road. A sleek, dust-kissed vehicle rolled to a stop. Not local. Not accidental. The door opened. Serafina stepped out. But she wasn't the woman who'd arrived broken and half-frozen in the heart of winter. Her hair was shorter now, falling just to her shoulders. She wore jeans, boots, and a soft gray cardigan. In her hand, she carried something wrapped in brown paper. Colt froze, his hammer still in hand. She walked toward him, steady and sure. I left too long, she said, pausing a few feet away. I didn't know if you were coming back, he admitted. I wasn't sure either, she said. But then I heard a song in my head, and it ended here. He didn't move. Not from anger, but because hope, once wounded, is wary. I'm not here to take up space you didn't save for me, she said gently. I'm here because I realized I don't want to spend my life performing. I want to live somewhere I don't have to be anyone but who I've become. He met her gaze. You know who that is now. I do. She held out the wrapped item. He peeled back the paper slowly. It was Junie's drawing, framed now. The three of them under the words were not lost anymore. She gave it to me the morning I left, Serafina said. I had it framed in a little shop on the way to Jackson. It reminded me where I actually started. He looked from the drawing to her. You look different. I feel different, she said. She told him about Kyle, about the offer, about the past she could reclaim, but no longer wanted. I want to give again, she said, just differently. Not from a penthouse. From here. Maybe start a music program. Teach kids who can't afford lessons. Live in the world that saved me. Colt swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. I kept your spot on the porch. She smiled. I was hoping you would. That evening, she stood in Junie's doorway. You came back, Junie whispered, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Serafina crossed the room and sat beside her. I never wanted to leave, but I had to make sure the woman you met here was real. And are you? Junie asked. I think I'm more me now than I've ever been. Junie threw her arms around her. I missed you the same amount every day. Serafina held her close. Then that's exactly how much I needed to come back. That night, she and Colt shared a quilt on the porch. 2 mugs of tea. The moon hung low, brushing silver light across the trees. I never thought I'd feel this again, she whispered. Not peace. Not like this. Colt turned to her. What do you feel? Safe, she said. Not just in the house. In the pause, the moment where nothing has to be earned. Just lived. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small carved piece of wood, a heart. Not stylized, but real. Anatomical. Human. I carved it the day I rebuilt the piano bench, he said. Sanded too far. Almost tossed the whole thing. But then I made this instead. Reminded me broken things can still hold. She touched it reverently. May I keep it? He nodded. It's not perfect. Neither am I. They sat in that silence. 2 people with every reason not to trust again, choosing to trust anyway. Are you staying? Colt whispered. Serafina looked at the stars, then back at him. I already did. And for once, the wind didn't howl. It simply carried their stillness into the night, like a vow. Just when the world outside the cabin had grown quiet again, when life had settled into its familiar hush, something shifted, like the first breeze of spring that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything. It began with something simple. The faint scent of cookies wafting through the cabin's open windows, a tune playing low and soulful on the radio, and the unexpected arrival of 2 souls the cabin hadn't known it had been waiting for. That weekend, a place long accustomed to silence found itself laughing again. Truly laughing. Not in memory, not in echoes, but with the unfiltered joy of strangers becoming something more. It was Serafina's idea of Course, an open mic afternoon just for the local kids, hosted right from the weather-worn porch, with a borrowed keyboard, mismatched lawn chairs, and a few handmade flyers thumbtacked at the general store and school library. She'd invited them all with a simple promise. Music and cocoa. Bring your own song. They hadn't expected much, but they came. 6 children brave enough to step up. One brought a harmonica and blew notes like a wild wind. Another recited a poem about tractors and friendship, words tumbling over themselves with sincerity. Junie played a duet with Serafina, awkward, stumbling, utterly joyful. Then came the final performer, a girl no older than 10, slight as a whisper, clutching a guitar that looked like it belonged to someone twice her size. She stepped to the mic, strummed 3 hesitant, jarring chords, and froze. Her lips trembled. Her courage broke. And then the tears came. Serafina didn't rush. She didn't console with empty words. She just stepped forward, sat on the edge of the porch, and in a voice so gentle it seemed to come from the trees, said, What if you just hum it, sweetheart? I'll play with you. And they did. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was beautiful. Colt stood just behind the porch rail, arms crossed, the hardened set of his shoulders slowly softening. He didn't watch Serafina like a guest anymore, or even a surprise. He watched her like someone who had always belonged, someone who had come home. Later that night, after the last cars disappeared down the gravel road and the lanterns had been dimmed, Colt and Serafina sat on the porch swing, legs gently brushing, a patchwork quilt draped across their laps. The stars above seemed impossibly bright, or maybe, finally, they were just seeing them clearly. I used to think I had to earn everything, Serafina whispered, her voice just barely touching the night air. Even love. Especially love. Colt didn't look at her when he answered. You don't earn love, he said. You return it. You build it. You carry it when it's too heavy for someone else. She turned then, really turned, and looked at him with a question that didn't shake or stumble. Do you love me? His answer was steady. Solid. Yes, since the day you played a song you didn't know you remembered. She leaned into him, her head resting on the slope of his shoulder. And you, he asked, breath held. I think I loved you the moment you told me I wasn't broken, just changing shape. He took her hand in his, and the silence between them filled with everything that mattered. The next morning, Junie came sprinting into the living room, her hands waving a poster like a victory flag. Crayon letters danced across the paper. The Serafina School of Music and Kindness. Beneath it, an eager scrawl, opening soon. Sign up on the porch. Donations, cookies, or compliments. Colt read it aloud and glanced over at Serafina. His brow lifted in a half-smile. You really going to do it? She smiled, warm and sure. Only if you'll build the benches. I'll build the benches, he replied, if you promise to keep the name. Junie jumped between them, full of mischief. And I'll be your first student. But I already know everything about kindness, so mostly just music. They laughed, the kind of laughter that doesn't need to echo, because it lingers in the walls, the windows, the hearts of those finally building something that lasts. A year passed, not in milestones, but in moments. No newspaper stories. No parades. Just slow, sacred days. Slightly burnt Sunday pancakes. Late summer piano lessons. Fences mended. Old tales retold. Life didn't unfold with thunder, but with grace. Serafina Vale, once a headline. Once a mystery. Now simply Serafina, a music teacher. A listener. A mender of spirits. A woman deeply loved. Her past, once roaring, had hushed to a lull. The foundation never made a statement. A new board formed. No scandal needed. Kyle Rivers sent a Christmas card without a return address. Serafina kept it unopened, tucked in a drawer. Not to forget, but to remember what she no longer owed. And then, one bright morning in the second spring of their life together, the cabin felt like it was holding something sacred. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floors. Lemon and cedar danced in the kitchen air. Colt Merrick, now grayer at the edges, softened by time, stood barefoot in the hallway, watching the two girls who had stolen his breath. Junie was at the piano, piecing together a fragile version of Claire de Lune, while Serafina followed along in an old, worn music book, a pencil perched behind her ear. You're getting closer, Serafina said, tapping the page gently. I'm getting worse, Junie groaned. My fingers hate me. No, Serafina smiled. Your fingers are tired. That's different. Colt leaned against the doorframe. Should I bring a mediator? Only if he's as charming as he is tall, she replied without missing a beat. No promises. He stepped forward and ruffled Junie's hair. She huffed like only an almost 10-year-old could. Can I take a break? She asked. You earned it. Serafina nodded. And Junie dashed outside with Peanut at her heels, the front door swinging slightly in the breeze. Serafina watched her go, then closed the music book and turned to Colt. She's growing fast. They always do, he said, especially when you wish they'd stay small. She walked to him, folding into his arms like something found again. I've been thinking, she murmured. Dangerous. he teased into her hair. She smiled. About how it all began. He pulled back slightly. You mean the alley? The fire. The way you held me when I couldn't speak. The way you stayed. Colt didn't reply, not with words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Serafina blinked. What's that? He opened it. Inside sat a ring, simple, beautiful. A vine motif curling delicately around the band. Not flashy, not expensive. Chosen by hands that had built shelter and carried grief. I don't need a wedding, he said. Not papers, not speeches, not flowers or witnesses. Her breath caught. But I need you. Every day. In every version of this life. Not because you were rescued, but because you stayed. And if you'll have me, I want to give you a place that doesn't just feel like home. It is home. Tears slipped quietly down her face. She cupped his cheek, her voice barely a breath. You already have me, she whispered. But I'll wear it. Proudly. He slid the ring on her finger. It fit as though it had been waiting for her all along. That evening, Serafina sat on the porch steps with Junie nestled against her under a shared quilt. Colt was nearby, tuning the toy guitar Junie swore was real, pretending it needed far more fixing than it did. The wind was soft. The stars arrived early. Do you think people ever stop needing second chances? Junie asked suddenly, the way only children do when their hearts grow faster than their years. Serafina didn't rush her reply. No, she said softly. But sometimes the second chance doesn't come from the world. Sometimes it comes from you, deciding to give yourself one. Junie looked up. Like you did. Serafina smiled. Exactly like I did. They sat that way for a long time, until the first fireflies of season blinked alive along the tree line. And Serafina whispered into the wind. I remember her now. The woman I was. Colt stepped closer, catching only the end. Do you miss her? No, she said, but I'm thankful she broke, so I could become someone worth staying for. He sat beside her, and with Junie nestled between them and Peanut asleep at their feet, they watched the day end in quiet gold. Some stories don't begin with noise, but the ones that stay, they continue quietly, honestly, and with heart.